Victoria, you can feel it now.
We just gone live.
Do you recognise anybody? You're the example. Yeah, that was. Oh, that's great.
Try that.
No, we said no, you can have it when you're speaking, I'm not.
It's only watch upstairs, and I'm already doing it now. So it doesn't matter.
No, honestly, I don't know. Yeah, it's going to get away. He found one. He found one.
Upstairs, not enough.
No, you're right. I didn't think about that.
Yes, they do. Really.
I did have. But it's okay. You can hit the floor, so that's fine. It's very small. He's got
Yes, yes.
This is the 2022 annual general meeting pension fund. I wonder if we also the annual festival with so many of them. And about 3D things like what's been going on over the last years. So I'm Chris Norman. I'm one of the finance managers at the County Council, part of the team that's responsible for running the pension fund on your behalf. In this meeting, you'll hear from a number of colleagues who also involved in providing the funds. And so just run through a few things at the beginning to give you some context of all of that fits together. I'm going to run through the objectives of the fund, how the fund is governed at a high level, a few of the highlights of the last year, and then just run through the agenda for the day. So the objectives of the fund. I'm not going to go into detail, but the key objective of the fund, why we exist, is to pay pensions accurately on time when they're due. There's a lot of things the fund has to have regard to, a lot of important things, but the bottom line is that's why we exist. Everything's got to fund into that objective. You see there's a second objective about ensuring that the funds available to make those payments on time. The reason why I put that up there as well is because it's such a big important chunk in its own right. As far as being accurate and on time is concerned, I just want to mention the data quality. So the Pensions Administration Service, and if you're an employer here, you'll liaise with good service. I've got a high focus on data quality. A lot of what we do is all about trying to make sure we've got accurate information and that can drive on making the right payments at the right time. So philosophically, if we focus on data quality, if we focus on that, then lots of good things automatically follow. And you'll be hearing about various things that we've been doing over the last year to try and continue to improve on the score. We also aim to operate an efficient administration service so we can convert good data into making the right payments. As far as funding is concerned, there's two sources of funding for the pension fund. One is contributions from employers and employees. One is investment returns. You'll be hearing about the investment strategy, about the valuation later this morning. Fundamentally, what the fund has to do is sensibly juggle those two sources of funding. Can't expect to rely overly on employer contributions for obvious reasons. Can't expect to rely overly on investment returns for various reasons. So when we're talking about valuation later on and investment strategy and everything else, those two sources of funding, how to sensibly juggle them to the greater good, is a key issue that we have to have regard to. So pension fund governance. I'm going to run through in summary how the fund is governed. So the Warwickshire County Council is the administrating authority for the pension fund. The County Council is the top tier of the governance. They delegate authority to the Staff and Pensions Committee to run the pension fund. That pension fund committee, the staffing side of it is to do with staffing matters within the County Council. The pension side of it is to do with the operation of the pension fund as a whole. They will look at things like governance and have more of a focus on executive issues to do with the administration of the fund. They delegate to a pension fund investment subcommittee the running of the investments side of the pension fund. Following myself, you'll hear from Councillor Kessel, who's the chair of the investment subcommittee. So those are the two executives. Alongside them, we have the local pension board, which has been in operation since about 2015. The role of the board is to assist the fund, making sure that we're well governed, we're thinking about the right things at the right time, doing things in the right way. So a lot of the function of local pension board is similar in nature to what we might call an overview and scrutiny, supporting the internal workers of the council. Alongside that, the fund has had regard to external entities such as the government, the LGPS Scheme Advisory Board, the pensions regulations. And the last thing to mention, which you can't see on this slide, is the way that we operate the fund is supported by an ecosystem of experts, advisors, consultants and officers. It's a big and complex area of work, and there's no one entity or person that can kind of cover all of those bases. So an important part of the role of officers in running the fund is to make sure that we mission the right expertise at the right time, so that all fits together and all works very well. I won't go through these in detail, but the key headline I wanted to say is that the fund continues to grow. And this is something I still struggle with, because my background is more mainstream finance, where we've spent the last 15 years shrinking, trying to do more for less, all that kind of thing. The reality is, all that time, the activity, the volume of pension has been growing and growing. So more assets under management, larger employer numbers, more members, more membership payments going out the door, and more complicated on every front. So more complicated to administrate investments. That's a key thing to hold on to. A lot of what we've done in the last few years has been around increasing and reshaping our resources, so we can have regard to this constant demand that there is out there. A few other things. So just like all of you, in different ways, the pension funds have to react to what's going on out in the world. Things like the war in Ukraine, the impact that's had, climate change, and so on. A key highlight to flag in terms of risk management is for the pension fund and for all of us is to think about what's the next massive thing that's going to happen, that's going to knock us all sideways, which no one's seen coming in. Because you can take any one of those things. Take, say, the war in Ukraine. If you wind back the clock, you don't have to wind it back far before you get to a point where no one was really worried about that. If you take COVID and wind back the clock, you don't have to go very far before no one was thinking about that. So we know about those, but what we don't know. And then on the bottom right, I sort of mentioned a few things internally that we've been doing to keep the pension fund operating. So, as I say, you hear about the 2022 valuation. Investing significantly more in the board's post-pension partnership, with £250 million into the Large Asset Credit Fund for last year. We're increasing our investments in private markets. We've got more than 400 million in private markets, more than it's ever been. Investing in those areas helps us to get the right risk and return profile. Hi, everyone. So just a quick run through of who you can hear from this model. So following myself, we hear from Councillor Kessel, Chair of the Executive Subcommittee. That subcommittee's got overall responsibility for where to invest, what's our investment strategy, what's our funding strategy, so important policies and decisions of that nature. Then we'll hear from Irons Robertson, who are the actuaries for the pension fund. They're going to talk about the 2022 valuation. So this work's already well underway. Following the AGM, we'll be issuing information to employing organisations about the contribution requirements for the next 3 years. Then we'll have a short break, and I'd encourage you in the break to take the opportunity to pick the brains of the various advisors, officers, admin from the fund, should you wish, and swap notes with each other as employers of the same. Then we have Irons Robertson again, but at a different part of Irons Robertson, they also happen to be our financial consultants for the fund, talking about the investment strategy, where that's at and where it's heading. I know Kerr's joined us from Baltic Coast. So we're part of the Board of the Coastal Pension Partnership. We're one of 11 partners who own an entity, and also obviously we're a client of it. I think about 43% of our assets are in the pool as at the end of the date for council last year. Expect that to grow significantly.
I'm really sorry, but I can't quite hear you. I just hear every other word or something.
Sorry. So then we'll hear from Vicky Jenks, who is the manager of the administration service. The LGPS administration function has had a lot to deal with the government issuing various regulations and making various decisions we have to then try and implement. And a key challenge for that service is dealing with that increasing complexity. Lastly, we'll hear from Victoria Moffat, who is the manager of the investments governance team in the pension fund. We'll run through what we're kind of getting up to in terms of governance of the fund, investments, our perspective. We've left us a little bit of room at the end for questions, but you can ask questions as we go along, and a little bit of headroom there in case we overrun. We hope to end at 12:30 or be questions. Oh yeah, sorry. And the last thing to say, I should have said this at the start. Fire exits. So we have fire exits at either end of this room. Should there be a fire, it's not a Tuesday morning, so I don't think we're going to have a practice alarm. The loos are just out here as you head back towards the exit. And then, as I said, we've got two breaks. 10:50, 12:30. So, are there any questions at this point?
Difficult for us to see back the yellow one today. Can that be changed, or is that too late?
I think it may be too late on apologies. Okay.
Is it possible to just do the blinds so that we don't see the reflection in the window, and then it might make it easier?
Can you make it bigger?
No.
Yes, thank you.
So apologies that you can't see the last slide, that's put up. Hopefully, that's what you can make it. So I'll hand over to Councillor Hedges of the investment statement team.
Sorry about this. Morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming to the AGM of the Warwickshire Local Government Pension Scheme. I'm Mr. Kettle. I'm an elected councillor and was invited last year to chair the investment subcommittee, which is made up of a number of councillors, including one of my colleagues at the back. Scale and complexity of your scheme continues to grow. The fund reaching new highs with an asset valuation of 2.8 billion, membership numbers over 54,000, employer numbers over 206, and annual benefits paid just under 90 million pounds. It's been a momentous year in many respects. Firstly, however, I'd like to pay my respects to the former chair of the Warwickshire Pension Fund, late Councillor John Horner. John sadly unexpectedly passed away in May 22. John, being the chair of the Council Pension Investment Subcommittee, was an active member of the Council Staff and Pensions and Audit and Standards Committee, as well as holding the role of Vice Chairman of the Council in the past municipal year. He should be Chairman of the Council this year. He was a very well-educated man, and have a mindset that could absorb vast amounts of information, and there is a lot of information to do with pensions, sort out the wheat from the chaff, and then give succinct and easy to understand advice. His immense contribution to the management of the fund will be greatly missed. I, and on behalf of my colleagues, would like to take this opportunity to express our appreciation for his time and commitment to the Warwickshire pension. 21-22 was another eventful and challenging year for the fund, dominated by the ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the increased scale and urgency of the need to both reduce and respond to climate change, and now the most challenging of economic climates. In addition to respond to these particular issues, the fund needs to ensure it is well positioned to operate in what is becoming a more volatile and unpredictable world. But our responsibility has not changed, and that is to ensure members' pensions are calculated correctly and paid on a timely basis. The fund has access to sufficient cash flow to actually pay those pensions, and the fund's investments are sound and able to continue to generate the returns required to maintain those payments, not just this year or next year, but into the foreseeable future of our youngest members of that scheme, so there can be 70 years hence. That is your pension team's job. So what else have we achieved this year? We've learned to work remotely. We've improved member access to their information through iConnect. Following on from the implementation of iConnect, the fund has moved on to online member self-service, with the rollout already underway in 2022, and that will continue next year. Significant activity has been undertaken in the area of cyber security. Clearly, that is always a challenge time for any organisation, but it is absolutely critical that we secure our boundaries to make sure that the only people who have access to that information are those who should. And finally, following the landmark McLeod case, the fund is now working on the necessary remedies that came out of that court case. Investments. The most fundamental issue the fund has faced are, and this won't be a great surprise, the effects of the war in Ukraine on asset values, supply chains, and which has driven high levels of inflation and rising interest rates. Not solely, but it has had a significant impact. In response, we have asked fund managers to seek to divest of such investments in Russia, the Russian-owned controlled assets where markets permit. However, our assessed level of exposure to those assets is in fact very small, at 0.2% of the assets under management. The fund is also fully aware of the risk and challenge of climate change. The fund continues to develop its policies on climate change and is looking to both evolve and improve measures to monitor more effectively its investment performance, but also those of the companies in which we are investing, and looking at their impact on climate change. There is a bandwagon on which a number of people are climbing, saying pension funds and others should have nothing to do with any companies involved in climate change or fossil fuels. Where do you draw the line? Because actually, when Amazon delivers your product, that is delivered by a car most likely using petrol or diesel. Those products will be made in businesses across the world using fossil fuels. Clearly, it's easy to spot those companies that are actually producing fossil fuels. Petroleum companies, the gas companies, the mining companies overseas, we obviously don't have any in the UK. What is important is not to just walk away from the problem, That's too easy. What we need to do is work with those companies to find a better way forward, a more climate change friendly way forward, whereby the products we all buy online or in the shops or wherever, we are still able to access, but in a climate friendly way. So I'm sorry for those who want us to walk away and say fossil fuels are the problem. Yes, they are the problem. We need to work out a constructive way forward, not just cut it off. The fund continues to invest in a number of other different funds, or a number of different funds, and in particular, 43% of its full funds are the Border to Coast Pension Partnership. We're currently managing some 11 local government pension schemes with assets of 38 billion on behalf of over 1 million members. That is a very significant, they are a very significant player in the investment market. That is one of the benefits of working with an organisation such as Border to Coast, is it does give us a big say in how things go forward, and also access to a huge amount of information and use. The fund invests further amounts in alternative funds, including private credit, private equity, and infrastructure during the year. The fund takes a long-term view of investment activity, and though volatility in markets continues, the fund ended the financial year, as I said earlier, at its highest ever valuation at 2.8 billion. And that is a funding level of 104%, meaning that as of March 22, the value of assets exceeded the value of liabilities. The 22 valuation is now underway, and this is another key process of the fund, and this will have regard not only to the current funding position, but the outlook of liabilities, which, as I said earlier, could go on for 70 years, and the assets required, asset returns required to meet those liabilities, and the fund's attitude to risk in determining an appropriate funding strategy and investment strategy. So again, thank you for coming today. And as I hand over to my far better qualified colleagues to take you through the rest of the agenda, I hope you enjoy the meeting and do feel free to ask those questions. That is why we are all here to help you with those, with answering those, although it probably won't be me. Finally, however, I would like to thank all those attending, and on behalf of the elected members of Warwickshire County Council, to thank all those who are working so hard in managing your fund on your behalf in these very challenging times. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Very much. Right, I think it's over to us now to talk about the 2022 valuation. So firstly, I'm Rob Bilton, and I'm one of the two fund actuaries that work on the fund, joined today with my colleague Richard Warden. And between us, we've been working with the fund over the last 12 months to get everything done for the valuation. So we're standing here today to talk to you about the context and about the outlook for the results, to help give you better understanding of your position and what the contribution rates that will be communicated in the coming days will mean. We've got half an hour today to go through it. There is quite a lot to cover. The valuation is it's one of the fund's biggest key risk, one of the fund's biggest risk management exercises. So we go in a bit of pace, but broadly what we're looking to cover is just to give a bit of background about the valuation, talk about the inputs. I'll talk about the inputs and the models that we've used. Don't worry, the modelling bit will be quick, I promise, because I realise there's only kids that enjoy that type of stuff. And then Rich will take over from me and we'll just talk about the results and give you some context for your own position and the outlook of this valuation. We love talking about this stuff. I mean, I love evaluation. We've been doing it for quite a few years. So if you do have any questions about anything that we talk about today, please do come and grab one of us at the breaks or afterwards, and we'll happily talk about it. Have a talk about and answer any questions you may have. So just moving on, so just background evaluation, what we're trying to do here in funding LGPS funds here, but certainly it's this key funding decision. On one side, we've got the liabilities, so that's the benefits that are owed to members, so the ones that have been accrued to date, and then members will continue to earn benefits in the future. The LGPS, it's an open pension scheme, and current members can earn more benefits, new joiners can join it. So we've got these two boxes on the liability side, so all the benefits that we're going to have to pay out in the future. To do that, to pay those benefits, we've got the assets, so on the other side, and those assets are made up of three elements. We've got the assets that have been accrued up to date, so that's £2.8 billion, that's been mentioned earlier, a lot of money. And then in the future, to fund both the benefits earned today, benefits earned in the future, we'll also have future contributions paid by yourselves as employers and by members, and also the future investment returns. And the key decision that we make when we do the valuation is where to draw that line for each individual employer, where to draw the line between returns and contributions. And it's a balance between affordability and risk. If we put that pink line really low down, the contributions would be lower, but it'd be a riskier strategy because we're relying on getting a higher level of future investment returns, which are uncertain. And vice versa, we could put that pink bar really high and have a really low risk strategy, but then we'd need more contributions from yourselves to employers, and we think that is just unaffordable. So we're trying to get that balance right for every employer, the balance between affordability and risk. So to do that, so when we do this as part of the valuation, what we do, really simple, high level, got a bunch of inputs, got some models, and then we get the outputs. And that's what we're going to talk through today. If you're paying attention to the content, you realise they match those three categories there. So we'll talk through each in a bit more detail today. So as well as how we do it, there's a timeline for doing this in. I mentioned it's a big risk management exercise. We spend a lot of time doing it. So Victoria, just the next page. Thank you. The valuation date itself was 31st of March 2022. The LGPS regulations give a year for the funds to do it. So we've got everything done and dusted and signed off by the 31st of March 2023. Because the contribution rates that we communicate to yourselves, those are the rates that will be payable from 1st of April 2023 for the next 3 years, so up to 31st of March 2026, by which time we'll have done the 2025 valuation and reassess the new set of contribution rates. The work for the valuation probably started this time last year, if not a bit earlier, so probably all a bit more bright-eyed, a bit more energetic. I certainly had more hair than I did now, but been working on that, working on the valuation, doing a lot of planning, trying to do as much work as possible early on, so we can sort of crack through when we get the valuation, get through the calculation stage as quickly as possible, and then be standing here today where we are in this yellow box, and probably a month earlier this valuation than we've been in the past, because of all that planning and pre-work we've done today to communicate the results. And this is the really important part of the valuation in my eyes. This is where the results are communicated to yourselves. It gives you the opportunity to understand your position, understand contribution rates, and come and ask questions. So as I say, results will be issued alongside an update version of the funding strategy statement, and Rich will talk a little bit more about what that means specifically. And then all we've got left to do in Q1 next year is finalise everything and get everything, as I say, done and dusted, signed off by 31st of March 2023. Well, if anyone's in Glasgow at 31st of March 2023, come to Hyman's offices, it'll be a big party. So that's at a high level the timetable. Just then going to talk about the inputs now and talk briefly about each one to give you some context for what's going into the valuation results. The first area we want to talk about is data. This is just a summary of the Warwickshire Pension Fund's data at March 2022 and at the last valuation March 2019. You can see that the bar at 2022 is much higher. There's a lot more member records at 2022 than 2019. Just shows the extra work that the fund's administration team have to do, as well as managing all the other changes that are going on, such as McLeod and other changes being on there. But when we get the data, we have to check it's correct. So we need good data to go in, because then we get good outputs. And actually, when we got the Warwickshire Pension Fund's data, it was of really good quality. So I just want to say thank you to all of you who are involved in the employer side of giving the data to the fund for helping make that happen. because really the foundation of a good valuation is clean membership data. So thank you very much for that. So once we get the data, the next input is assumptions. Now, we have to make assumptions about the future, because as Councillor Kettle talked about, these benefits are going to be paid many, many years into the future. So this just looks at a sort of a profile for an individual member's pension and what will come to payments when they retire. A lump sum will come into payment. Then the pension, which is increased annually in line with pension increases. The benefits in the RGPS are index linked. They increase in line with consumer price index inflation, CPI inflation. And the pension's paid out when a member dies. And then if they have a dependent, then their pension becomes payable for them until their death. So we have to make all sorts of assumptions about what future inflation will be, future CPI inflation, when members will retire, when they will die, and what salary increases will be, how much pension will they exchange for lump sum. So all these different assumptions are really important so we can try and get a reasonable estimate of what the future benefits that will be paid from the pension fund will be. And that allows us to calculate the liabilities on the first side, that side of that equation. There's been no significant change to the assumptions at 2022 from where we were at 2019, except inflation. Hopefully that shouldn't be a surprise to everyone in the room. We're in a much different inflationary environment than we were 3 years ago. I never thought I'd say, 2019 at the time looked quite stable and quite boring compared to where we are now. But this chart just shows what inflation assumption we've got effectively baked into the results. The green dotted line was where it was at 2019. So this chart just shows what we think future inflation will be for each of the following 20 years from the valuation. And you can see it was hovering around 2 to 3%, quite close to the Bank of England's target. At 2022, the inflation starts much higher. We're expecting higher short-term inflation, and we saw actually the September CPI inflation measure that typically sets what the pension increase will be the following year. So the April 2023 pension increase, subject to the government makes the final decision normally in March 23, will be 10.1%. So we've definitely got higher short-term inflation, and then we do expect it to come back around to the Bank of England target in the longer term. That is their target. That is what they're aiming to do. That's why they've raised interest rates yesterday, because they're trying to get control of inflation and get it back to that target. So we do expect to come through. But what the higher short-term inflation means is that there's upward pressure on the cost of benefits, both those accrued already to date and those that be earned in the future. So some upward pressure at this valuation from inflation. Just a quick chat about life expectancy. Nothing has significantly changed to this valuation, but I'm aware since the last valuation we've had the COVID pandemic, and there's been no significant change in the life expectancy assumption despite the COVID-19 pandemic, because it's just too early to tell if that's going to have long-term implications for how long members will live for. As I say, we need to think about the long term when we set assumptions, so we're looking at what the long-term impact will be. But it's really interesting when looking at life expectancy, we all have a vested interest in it, how long we're going to live for. When we look at the Warwickshire Pension Fund, we sort of can benchmark it against other LGPS funds and other public and private schemes here. And this is what the chart on the right-hand side shows there. So it just shows the average life expectancy for males and females on the vertical and horizontal axis. You can see the Warwickshire Pension Fund is slightly higher, has a slightly higher average life expectancy for the members. Well, the members have a slightly higher life expectancy than the LGPS average. And when we look at the breakdown of the fund's membership, we can segment the members into different longevity groups using some indicators such as postcode and salary and affluence. You can see actually there's a larger majority of the fund's members are in the highest living longevity groups when we do that. So that's not a surprise. So just to give a bit of context for the life expectancy there, I think it's always of interest. So the next big input to talk about is just the funding strategy. So we've got data, we've got assumptions. We then need to think about the funding strategy to apply. So how are we going to fund these benefits? And that generally differs between different employer groups. Although it's one fund, we've got 200-300 individual employers in the fund, and they're all different types of employers. And depending on the employer type, that dictates the different type of funding strategy. Because for some employers, such as or community admission bodies tend to be charities. They're normally closed to new members. And when they leave the pension fund, they leave on what called cessation basis. So when we're setting the funding strategy, the funding plan for them, we're targeting this cessation basis. Whereas the other employees in the fund are open, they continue to participate, so we use the ongoing funding basis for them. And these are terms defined in the funding strategy statement. Similarly, for the time horizon, when we're setting the funding plans, we want to set stable funding plans over a time horizon. For the councils, academies and colleges, it's a long-term time horizon because open to new entrants, continue to implement, so take that long-term view. Transfer admission bodies, also known as contractors, they're normally relatively short because they just participate from their contract period. And again, those closed bodies, medium to short, just depending, because when the last active member retires, that's what triggers their exit from the pension fund. So their time horizon is based on when we think that will happen. Then the likelihood of success, this is effectively how much prudence is incorporated into funding strategy, into individual employees funding plan. And that is a reflection of the covenant strength of different employers in the fund. For councils and academies, likelihood of success 70%. We see those as the employees that have the strongest covenant in the pension fund. Councils because they have precept ability, academies because we have guarantee from the DFE that guarantees the liabilities. The academy goes bust and the DFE would step in to pay the liabilities. So that's why we're able to take that view. Colleges, more uncertainty around the covenant there, so reflect that higher likelihood of success. And similar with community admission bodies, a bit less financially robust, but higher likelihood of success there. Final column is stabilised contributions. For some employers, we can take a view of putting explicit stability mechanisms in there to manage contribution rate increases and decreases. And at the last valuation, there's an explicit stability mechanism in for councils, again, because of that really strong covenant there, and we have a big broad membership base, and stability also relies on stable membership. Okay, so that was the strategy at the last valuation. At this valuation, when we carried out the strategy review, worked with the fund officers and discussed at committee. Staying the same, pretty much, not much change. The only change I've got highlighted is for the academy employers, in that we're able to introduce a bit some more stability in the funding plans for academies. It's not the same as the councils. That explicit mechanism for the council relies on big stable membership. Academies are much smaller and we see bigger membership churn with that. But we're able to put some stability in there by that likelihood of success having a little corridor around it. So if your current rate, if you're an academy, your current contribution rate has a likelihood of success associated with it, somewhere, plus or minus 2.5% of that likelihood of success, the rate doesn't change. So that helps introduce a bit more stability for academy employees there. But really the message is continuity in the strategy and funding plans. The final bit from me is models. I've just got one slide, won't be quick here, just to help you understand how we go about like modelling contribution rates, setting contribution rates here. And it's a risk-based approach we use. And what that means is we take your current funding position, where you currently are today, so what your share of the fund's asset values, each of you has a notional share of the fund's asset values, which we track going forward, so contributions paid in, benefits paid out, investment returns added to it. Where your starting assets are, what benefits are being accrued by your members, your active, third and pensioner members, and project that forward into the future. See how that will evolve. And we don't just project it under one outlook for the future, we project it in 5,000 different economic scenarios. That's what all these lines are trying to represent, just a few of those 5,000 scenarios. And we project it forward for as long as your funding time horizon is. So what talked about there, for some employees that's 19 years, for some employees it may only be a few years. And what we do at the end of that funding time horizon, we look at the 5,000 scenarios and we see and what we're trying to do is calculate a contribution rate such that that likely success was 70% or 80% of those 5,000 scenarios achieve the funding target. So have enough money to pay benefits into the long term. That's what we're trying to do. So when you get the results schedule, you will see on your results schedule will be a box which will say what your funding target is, what your time horizon is, what your likelihood of success is, and that's what goes into our models when we set the contribution rates. I feel I've done enough talking now. I'm going to hand over to Richard to talk about the workplace.
Well, everyone, good to see everybody in person. Actually, it's nice to sit in front of a laptop, staring at a screen, so I can eyeball people that are falling asleep as well. So, Rob talked about all the stuff that goes into evaluation, assumptions and data, etc. So this is coming to another bit. This is evaluation results. So, on to this slide here, and the councillor Kettle's already mentioned, I think 104%. So hopefully you can see that at the back as well. Okay, so 3 years ago we were at 92% funded, so what's the deficit? This is whole fund, incidentally, whole fund, not on any particular employer. 92%, so not in a bad place, but still kind of, looking at deficit. Good performance over the last 3 years. It's been driven, the 104 that Councillor Kettle mentioned there, it's been driven mainly by investment performance, strong investment performance, about 28% from memory over the last 3 years. And so that's pushed up the assets a lot, more than what we probably expected, I guess, back in 2019. So it's gone there, the line from about 2.2 billion to about 2.8 billion currently. As at the valuation date, of course, that will have moved since then, up or down, probably down a bit since then, but also liabilities will have moved. Liabilities last time were 2.4 billion spread across the classes there. We're up to about 2.7 billion, so we've got a surplus now, rather than a deficit of about £100 million. So we divide the 2.8 by 2.7, you get 104%. Check the maths, hopefully that works. So on the liability side, you also kind of expect both of these to grow, but they've both grown probably by a bit more than might have expected. Liabilities are driven by inflation that Rob mentioned, inflation expectations. That's the main thing that's pushing up liabilities, but assets are going up to didn't go up because of that investment performance. So it's kind of a good news in terms of a snapshot. That is a snapshot. It will move. You get a jagged line over time from the funding level, but it's good news at the valuation date. You see there at the bottom, there's a wee thing that we kind of did a bit of comparison against other LGPS funds. It was reported at the time, and we compare favourably against them. So most LGPS funds are seeing improvement in this valuation. I think they're a wee bit above the kind of average, the pack, which is good news. Won't be to continue. I think the next slide, yeah. Now, apologies, this is really detailed and bean counters and actuaries like this kind of stuff, so you might get into the guts. So I'm not going to go through all this, we don't have time. You'll see on the schedule, should we get to shortly, you'll have your own, each employer will have its own version of this on the schedule, so you can feel free to look at that at your leisure when you get it. But that's maybe a couple of things just to pick out from here, perhaps, where you can see that the cash flow is an interesting area, perhaps, for the pension fund. So you've got over the last 3 years, 213 plus 58 of money coming in from employers and employees to the whole fund. So my maths is right again, 271. It's coming, but gone out as benefits being paid out to members, to pensioners and people retiring, etc. 254. So cash flow positive over the last 2 years, not much. And that's interesting from the investment perspective. So you want cash flow positive means when money comes in, you can invest it. If a cash flow negative, you have to think about, well, should we use investment income? What should we do with the asset side? So we're kind of close to that tipping point, and we're looking at liquidity quite closely, working with funding that. Some funds are already in the LGPS in the negative territory. So you're still cash flow positive, albeit you're quite close to that kind of neutral position there. Another couple of interesting bits, sorry, I didn't see that. The big items on the right hand side, that's looking at kind of gains and losses over the last 3 years, 350, higher than expected investment returns. So that's that good investment performance feeding through to the surplus. And on the negative side, -195 for inflation, that's that high inflation expectation, so that's pushing the surplus down a bit. So as I say, you'll get one of these in your own schedule. Slide. So this is just kind of looking now at the employers, the makeup of the fund and how it is across the different employer groups that Rob talked about earlier. Very few councils, hardly any, but not surprisingly, huge bodies, lots and lots of members in them. So these bars have a number of active members. So that 60% of the active membership in the fund rests with councils. Liabilities even bigger, over 70% of the liabilities rest with councils. out of the whole fund, so about 2.4, 2.5 million, 70% of that's councils, very few of them. Got a few other scheduled bodies, I think that maybe includes like the police and fire, I think, sort of bodies, police and others, town and parish councils, yeah. So there's a few of them, they're a smaller group. Academies, of course, a lot of active members now are part of academies, haven't converted from local retained schools, so you'll see the numbers there as well, about 40% of all the total employers, lots of academies. The total make up academies. You've got colleges, one or two of them, and some of the mission bodies as well. Quite a lot of the mission bodies, typically small entities, quite a lot of them in the fund. And then just to make the point again, I mentioned already that 104% is at the whole fund level. That there, just lots of dots, that's basically lots of employers in the fund and their funding levels. They were estimates at the time, I believe, but the point is that you could be well below 104, you could be well above, and it really depends on all sorts of factors. So that will be in that schedule. You'll be receiving shortly, you'll see your own funding level and how it's moved since 2020. And yeah, team-wise, I think kind of Rob's alluded to this a bit already. The funding position has improved, but bear in mind the funding position relates to past service benefits, so benefits accrued to the valuation date only. So it's good news that of course, there are two elements of the contribution rate. We've got the past bit and you've got the future service costs. So that funding position 104, you saw, doesn't affect future service costs. So we think of the contribution rates, we need to think of both of them. But what's happening is the funding position has generally improved with most employers. Hopefully we'll see an improvement. So that's good news. You've got this thing called the secondary rate, you might remember, the contribution rate, and that might well come down compared to what the position was in 2019. On the kind of negative side, and actually always seem to come up with some bad news, even if things look good. That's the primary thing is the cost of future service benefits. That will go up for a lot of employers a bit because of higher inflation expectations. So what's going on in this valuation in general? Primary rates up a bit. Fixed rates are down a bit for most your typical employer, and so the two globally offset each other. You might not, I think most are around about the same as they were in 2019. You'll see that in your schedule. Don't be surprised if there's an increase, and don't be surprised if you've got a reduction as well, because there's a mixture of this valuation, but it's relatively stable. I think it's fair to say across most employers, and again, you'll see that when you get your schedule. Maybe next slide. Yeah, and this is again, we talked a little bit some of the stuff that each employer is different. There's lots of diversity amongst employers, and here's some of the things on the left that are different between employer groups. So you've got the funding profile. A good example of that perhaps is the difference in past and future service matters, the comment there. So for example, if you've got an academy is typically made up of mostly active members, we call them immature employers. Nothing to do with the attitude of that employer, but academies, just in funding terms, of insurers and all long time horizon, very few deferrals and pensioners. Whereas a council typically will have lots of deferrals and pensioners, much more mature, a shorter duration. So that makes a difference to the way the funding position changes. Membership experience, if you've had more ill health, so higher salary growth, that will feed into your results as well compared to other employers. And your profile of membership, older membership versus younger, primarily will be higher. And so on, and this basically contributions that have been paid in the past as well. You'll see in the schedule just a slight change from last time, as it just kind of hopefully a bit better information. What we did in 2019 schedule on life expectancy, which you all mentioned, we sort of show the average life expectancy at certain ages. So that was at the whole fund in the last set of schedules. So you still had underlying that your own. Each employer had its own life expectancy assumptions, but in the schedule this time you've got your own one, so you can see. So if you compare two employers against one another, you'll have different set of life expectancy assumptions. That's because you've got different memberships. So what we're trying to do with life expectancy, and indeed not as much as you can avoid cross subsidy. So you pay for whatever your memberships life expectancies are. Excellent, so that's the right way to do it. You've got different membership and different factors that feed into life expectancy for each employer. So you'll see that in your schedule as well. So, funding strategy statement review, FSS. Rob's already mentioned this. There's not very really material changes in the FSS. I have to say, if you looked at this in the past, it was a slightly turgid week to be on. Even Ashley's get slightly more of an interest, but we have to include lots of stuff by by law, there's a huge amount of guidance says you must mention this. So it's become very big over time as more and more legislation's been added to it. What we've done in this valuation, it hasn't really, the information hasn't changed, but you'll see, hopefully, when you see this document, we've kind of got a core element, a much shorter core bit, and then it's a few appendices where you can pick the bits you're interested in. So if you were coming up to exit or something, there's a cessation policy, you can go there and find out what happened in the fund. Or just think about maybe prepayments, paying in lump sums, for example, which some bodies might do. There's now a prepayment policy and so on. So hopefully it'll be easier to navigate. But the information itself hasn't fundamentally really changed from before. Hopefully it's slightly easier to read. So have a read of that when it comes through. Rob's already seen this, so here we are. I mentioned this, I won't go through this, but here we are here. We're at Q4 and coming up to winter. Valuations, hopefully we've done most of the number crunching. So yeah, it's this consultation period, which again is required under the regulations. Your chance to feed in any thoughts you have on the schedules and on the SS for that price. So please, if you've got any questions at all, please do use that consultation period. So what you need to do next steps, read the schedule, hopefully check the data is correct, hopefully it is. But if you think the data looks a bit dodgy, please do feed it in because it can affect your results. So if you think it looks a bit iffy, please let the team know as soon as you possibly can. Then our all our best to keep clients as much as possible. So hopefully that's not the case, but do read it. Read the updated FSS and again talk to the pension fund officers with any questions. You know, and let them know of any changes in your circumstances in particular. And I think this is maybe a final slide. Just a quick summary here. So funding positions generally better. Why? Stronger investment returns, but we've got this high inflation thing, which can offset some of that. And then contribution rates, primary rates up a bit, secondary rates down a bit. Overall impact will vary, but broadly fairly stable. Area that speaks with funding questions. So hopefully finalise that's okay, Victoria. But happy to mail or off to take questions in the meantime, or we, as I say, you'll be circulating and having a copy of Teams, so we can tweet there as well if you want.
Just one thing, I mean, that was a wonderful whistle stop tour. And hopefully there's somewhere that these people could go that can sit and read, maybe in a dark room or a light room, whichever they choose, so they can study what you just explained to them. Because there is a lot of information there for people to, you do this every day, we don't.
Yes.
So there is a lot to take in, understand, digest, to then fire questions at you at absolute time.
Yeah, of course, and we're always going to be available today, but the funds available, the funds speak to us, we're very happy to chat to any questions we want more detail. The slides will be available anyway, so
Yes.
you certainly have access to the slide, you'll get the schedules and the FSS, so yeah, it's a damn thorough on the head job and sit down and just make sure you understand this stuff, and it's a lot. Yeah, the modelling goes in, there's a lot of maths and things that go into it, but nonetheless, it's important to understand your position. This is crystal soft, so it's,
Thank you.
any other questions, or should we?
Just one, you wait in CPI for that first of April 2022, we'll obviously know the big impact from that point. Would that make them the risk going forward? Valuation getting more likely to get it.
It will feed into the, you get that whatever rotation we've installed for next year is, say it's 10%, that will kind of crystallise as an experience side and feed into 2025 results. That said, part of the modelling thing that Rob talks about is, we kind of stress test inflation. And so there'll be some kind of high inflation scenarios amongst that stress test. We're not saying it can't happen, but in sort of, we've got a level of confidence that we're suggesting posting of this valuation kind of, can cope with inflation. And on the asset side, we've got inflation linked assets should, when you should get kind of inflation linked returns from the asset side as well. So there's kind of a bit of hedging going on in terms of the asset side as well. So we do stress tests those rates and factor in things like in periods of high inflation. So there's a lot to take in. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry.
I'm not sure whether this is more for you or for people around the administration of this fund, but traditionally, there have been LGPS administration funds which are in various locations in local authority areas. And so traditionally, the pension funds have had one large employer or a small number of relatively large employers. And I'm sure everybody's been struggling over the last 10 years as the number of employers in each fund are increasing, which adds to the complexity. And a lot of that's driven by the academies, and I have represented an academy trust. If we flip that on its head, one of the real complications for us is that we have a lot of funds to deal with, which means we can't really engage properly with any one fund because it's just administrative, you know, your mind is blown and you will do it differently. From your knowledge as an actuary, you know, one of the major players across the whole sector, are we getting anywhere, perhaps reorganisation of how we do the sector as a whole to ease some of these constraints, which are pushing up the administration costs, both for the fund and for individual employers?
Certainly, and a lot of officers speak as well, but they have from just purely from the actuarial side, obviously, alignments, defining lots of these funds. You are seeing consolidation in the sector, lots of academy trusts now taking on. Probably know it expect there's a kind of this thing called the direction order, who can, subject to the Secretary of State asking the funds involved, and consolidate liabilities in one fund. Now that is, it's quite an onerous process at the moment. That's basically expensive. We've all had how many actuaries you know about how many people buy people, so it is expensive and it's probably quite up. It can't, I have seen it happen, but it does take time because too many investing. You sort of issue actually, I think, I'm right, the way it works is if the academy trust does all that consolidation, it takes on another academy, which is possible in the future. You have to go through it again, you have to then go through another order. So we have seen consolidation in the sector, and we have seen some of that going on, but it's tricky, a bit messy, but I don't know whether.
So, well, just to share, I mean, I know that the scheme advisory board, so the body sort of looks over the LGPS and the LGPS and the scheme advisory board. Do you keep coming around to looking at the academies and saying, is there anything to do to help some of the issues that you encounter? They are aware of it, and they do keep doing it. The tricky thing they've got is it is very complex because yes, you know, the new schools they're converting from the council that's in that pension fund, and how can you pass it about? So there's a complex issue, but I know they are aware of it, and I know that's it. I think the fact say that there's no silver bullet to it, you know, there's no very easy solution, so we'll get to it.
It is madness at the moment. We've got three of these. There are three sets of assumptions that are really different. We've got three sets of outcomes, and we're paying different rates for our employees who maybe are in schools that are 2 miles from and yet we're employing the same pay scale, possibly live in the same street, so they're on deputies. It's really difficult.
Yeah, the LGPS is one scheme, it's made up of many.
Yeah, it's the problem.
And as you know, they all have different risk appetites with different investment returns. So you start off at conversion, you're starting off from a council that will be better or worse funding than another council. So very hard to equalise all of that. You know, in terms of your rate, usually across all the state funds, you're absolutely spot on. It's a form of the issue, and start keep looking at it.
Spending an awful lot of administration money.
There's more, I mean.
And I know the fund is as well, because they're now doing the
Yeah, I would just like to add to that as well as pensions administration manager. The biggest area of growth for us as academies, because it's not just the schools converting, it's some contractors that they bring to the fund as well for catering and cleaning services. So, you know, if we can simplify that in any way, it would be brilliant. It's kind of a common sense approach, but it's very complex in how you do that. So, you know, nationally, I think there's one consolidation going on at the minute, which is the Oasis multi-academy trusts. You know, funds are very nervous about that happening because it is a massive onerous task to try and consolidate academies into one fund. But obviously, we can only see more academies coming in because of the white paper saying all schools need to be accredited by 2030. So, you know, we just need to keep pushing back in some way and saying that the burden of having to do this is becoming too great. So not only for the schools, but also for the administrations. So we just need to keep pushing back.
Yes. Yeah, we take off, sorry. I'll sit down.
Actually, we're going to take a break. I propose that we be at about 15:15, slightly later than planned, but we've got a bit heavy at the end. 15:15. We'll carry on with the second half of the. One thing I forgot to say at the beginning, by the way, apologies for this, is that we'll have some food on afterwards. So at 12:30, for those of you who stay in questions or have something to eat, some food will be available. Slides and that weren't so easy. We'll amend those to try and make them clear before we share them after the meeting. Apologies, can't fix them right now. So the first presentation after the break is Pearson from Hines Robertson, who's going to talk about the fund's investment strategy.
Good morning, everybody. So I also work at Hines in a different part to Rob and to Richard. My particular role is to advise the fund on its investment strategy. What I thought I would do is start off just giving you an outline of our approach to investment strategy and recapping on a little bit of the material that I will present to last year. Starting with a definition, so investment strategy is a widely used and I'm afraid often abused term. So what we mean by it is the approach and the principles that the fund employs to deliver its investment objectives over the long term. And we take into account a load of things, your current funding position, your appetite for investment risk, the affordability of the contribution rates that we ask of employers, and the market environment. And clearly on most of those factors, an awful lot has happened in the last 3 years since the last investment strategy. Why does it matter? Well, a few reasons on the right-hand side there, but I've just highlighted the last one. That there is a lot of academic evidence that shows that investment strategy is the single most important driver of outcomes for long-term investment funds. So very, very well worthwhile spending time with. We have a now very well established framework for doing that, which starts with the purpose and the objectives of the scheme. We try and test your risk appetite, how much tolerance the fund has for first investment outcomes. I think it's important to clarify the investment beliefs, because that helps to guide the way in which the strategy is implemented. Those things set us up to review the high-level investment strategy and the investment structure. So what those two things mean in a second. And then we move through to implementation. Implementation of changes to your strategy takes a lot of effort from everybody involved, and in some cases takes a lot of time. So we will probably still be implementing some of the changes that we discussed today when it comes to the next valuation. And then finally, review and refinement. So your strategy should be fairly stable and consistent over time, but it is important that we review it formally once every 3 years, as we're doing, and then continually review it. So the first big decision is around high-level investment strategy, and simplistically, this is what the fund invests in. These days you can invest in an enormous range of different asset classes. The chart here, the alphabet soup on the chart, for those that can read the detail, are some of the options that you have. And we've shown how those are positioned in terms of the amount of investment risk involved and the expected return. We find it useful to try and simplify that complexity by focusing on 3 different categories of assets. Growth assets, like equities, which should give you a good long-term return over the rate of inflation over the long term, but they are relatively. There are income assets like property and infrastructure. There are a high proportion of the returns are received in the form of income, which tends to make the returns more stable, therefore lower risk. They also diversify some of the risks associated with your portfolio. And finally, protection assets, so investment grade corporate bonds, government bonds, cash. These are assets which reduce the overall level of risk that the fund is taking, and also help to match the liabilities that you have paying benefits to members. So in our experience, the most important thing to get right in this high-level investment strategy is the mix of growth and protection assets. We do a lot of modelling to support the advice that we make in these areas. Some of the same sort of modelling that Rob talked about earlier. So the second area of decision is the investment structure. So very crudely, this is how the fund invests in the asset classes that it's chosen to focus on. So there's a huge number of decisions that have to be taken here in all sorts of areas, like the precise specification of the assets, the style that your investment managers adopt, the carbon footprint of the assets, increasingly important these days, the management structure, the structure of the funds that you invest in, and also investment policies that guide the way in which the fund is managed day to day. These decisions tend to be guided by what the fund believes in, what the fund believes is most important. So that's the approach. I'd like to move on to some of the results so far, because it is still ongoing as the work with valuation and funding strategy. And the place obviously to start is the objectives. So as Chris mentioned earlier on, the primary objective is to make sure that there is enough capital in the fund to pay benefits as and when they fall due. From an investment perspective, there are some supporting objectives. So we're also trying to make sure that all the benefits that have already been accrued at any point in time going forward have a reasonable likelihood of being fully funded. We want to make sure, as far as possible, there is an appropriate and affordable and a stable level of contribution that we're asking from employers. And finally, there is sufficient liquidity to pay the bills, to pay pensions and to pay expenses when those obligations become due without being forced to sell assets. So when we think about the objectives and the implications for the investment strategy, we find that it's very important to maintain a balance between a level of investment risk and return that we're comfortable with and a level of contributions that are affordable. When the fund moves in and out of surplus, it's sometimes necessary to change those variables, change the level of investment risk, change the contribution rates in order to bring the fund back into balance. Now, as Rob and Richard mentioned, since the last valuation, the fund has moved from a deficit to a surplus position. That's obviously a good thing, but it did cause us to ask, has enough changed here that we need to adjust things to bring that balance back? And in particular, whether, because the fund is now in surplus, whether there is some scope to reduce the level of risk to protect funding position that has been established. And it's absolutely right that we should consider that. There is no one caveat. The fund is open to new members, to new contributions from existing members. And those future benefit accruals account for a high proportion of the total liabilities that the fund will face on a 10 and 20-year view. And in order to make sure that those future liabilities can be funded with reasonable contribution rates, the portfolio has to generate a reasonable amount. return, generate return, unfortunately, you have to take risk. And so what we've found is that there is a real limit on how much the fund can de-risk at this stage, and still generate enough. I'll try and sort of turn those into more sort of concrete numbers, that small change on the next slide. So here what we've done is shown the old strategy we've been pursuing for the last few years and the proposed new strategy for the next period. And we've defined those in terms of the target allocation to each of the main asset classes and also to those three groups of growth, income, protection. We've colour-coded the new strategy. I'm sure whether you can quite see it. Green where the allocation has gone up, in pink where it's come down. What we found in doing our review this time is that the old strategy was a perfectly decent strategy, very robust, high likelihood of success, of being fully funded, and a reasonably level of downside risk. So, one could say, why change? Well, the reason for changing is that we believe that with moderate reallocation from growth to income, so the percentage of income assets increasing to 37%. With that moderate reallocation of that, we can deliver an improvement in the projected funding over the 1920 years. And that's worth having. Any improvement is. In fact, that reallocation is actually continues the process of diversification, growth to income, that the fund has been undertaken for quite a few years. And given the scale of the numbers I've mentioned, we would put these changes very much in the category of fine-tuning rather than change. Moving on to investment structure. So how you implement all this stuff. The review of this is being conducted in phases throughout this financial year. So what I wanted to do was to give you an update on the recommendations, decisions that have been made so far. Starting first with your listed equity portfolio, which is still the biggest sub-portfolio within the fund. And the core of this portfolio is a portfolio of global equities that are benchmarked against indices where individual stocks are weighted by market capitalisation, which is the normal sort of traditional approach. We think that's absolutely right, and we recommended that to retain. We also think you should retain some overweight to the UK. So this is quite common within the LGPS. There are good reasons to be somewhat overweight your home market, but we're also conscious that the UK is actually now only 4%, less than 4% global capital, and it faces some particular headwinds. So what we've recommended is that the overweight of the UK is reduced by a reason. And then you also use a mixture of active and passive fund managers. The reason you use active managers is because they offer the potential of outperformance. However, doing so increases the downside risk and is also more expensive. We think it's right to have a mixture, but we have recommended a percentage that are managed in a relatively expensive way with active management is reduced somewhat. We also think it's absolutely appropriate to continue active management through bullet and the cases for this. You have some exposure to so-called factor-based strategies, which is where the stocks are which are benchmarked against indices where the stocks are weighted by other factors, like the profitability of the company, strength of its balance sheet. This turns out to be a good way, and a low-cost way of capturing some of that performance. So we think it has a part to play in the fund. But we're also aware that there are now much better alternative strategies available in the market. We're recommending that the fund's current strategy is replaced with one of those superior alternatives. And finally, on the equity side, because there is a fair amount to do here in terms of implementation, and also because there is a fair amount of uncertainty and volatility in markets, we're recommending that the implementation of these changes is phased over a period of time. The next area we looked at was private markets, so things like private equity, private debt, and infrastructure. Our review concluded that these were still attractive asset classes for long-term investors who don't need daily liquidity, which is the happy place that the fund is in. We've recommended maintaining or increasing the target allocations, slightly between different. We've also recommended focusing on the lower risk income producing segments of each of these asset classes. So, for example, in private debt, we recommended that you focus more on senior secured loans rather than some of the higher risk, big high yielding segments within that. Now, most of the investments in private markets are made through so-called closed-end funds that have a finite life. When they're done, they return to investors. And what this means is that you have to continue to make material commitments to the new private market. During the year, the fund's made some significant commitments to Warwickshire Coast in this area and will continue to do so going forward. And we've also suggested that the fund continues, for now at least, to use a combination of Warwickshire Coast and third-party fund managers to execute this part of the property review is ongoing. So we're halfway through that piece of work now. We think property remains attractive for long-term investors, despite the changes that everybody will be aware of over the last few years. We've recommended maintaining the target allocation of 10%. But what we've also said is, yes, continue to focus on core UK commercial property, as we do, but seek to build in additional diversification. Make allocations to property in other parts of the world, allocations to other types of property, like residential property, for example, and also get some diversification across the risk spectrum. And finally, protection assets, so investment grade corporate bond and government bond. We were going to review this part of the portfolio early next year, and we've brought forward that review in order to consider the opportunity to lock in some additional protection for the fund, because those sorts of assets are trading at valuations that are much more attractive than they were in, largely for the reasons that should be very well. So we've brought that forward, and hopefully there will be an opportunity to do a little bit more de-risking protection, which is just as well, because my last slide is about the market outlook. This is not a slide I present with any confidence, I have to say. There are some key themes, and none of them are great. Inflation, it's risen higher and it's persisted a lot longer than I think everybody expected. It's not good for the fund, and this increases the nominal value of the liabilities. It also erodes the real value, particularly of any fixed income. There is some mitigation here. You have a significant exposure to equities and real assets, give you good protection against inflation over the long term. And you also have some exposure to index-linked gilts, which hedges the movement of the value of them. On the back of high inflation, of course, central banks have been raising interest rates, especially in developed markets. And that's not great either. Reduces the value of your assets, although it does, on the flip side, create some opportunities to buy assets that previously were too expensive. So, yeah, two sides of that coin. Here you're protected by diversification, and in particular, exposure to assets where a lot of the return comes from income paid now and in the next couple of years, rather than the promise of capital growth in 10, 20. So diversification is very good. There is, I'm afraid, increased likelihood of recession. The hope was that it's the spike in inflation can be managed down in a relatively graceful way without putting economies into deep recessions. Hopefully, deep recessions will be avoided, but it seems increasingly likely that there will be, or may already be, a recession in many different. Recessions reduce the value of your equities. They also increase the likelihood of bonds. Allowance for bought bonds. The mitigants here are a diversification, particularly geographic, but also that focus on the lower risk alternatives within each asset class, which has been the key part of the so far. Macroeconomic risks, I'd be here all morning listing them, but also I'm thinking about Ukraine, about the geopolitical struggle between the US and China. And I'm also thinking about food security and version. All this is increasing the level of market volatility. When volatility goes up, investors demand a higher return from assets that they buy, which usually pushes down the price of those assets. This is probably the hardest risk to mitigate against. The best way of doing it is diversification, but also relying on your active managers to keep you out of the worst. And finally, climate change. Increasingly acknowledge that countries are not doing enough to combat climate change. Why that's important is because it increases the likelihood of further government intervention, regulation and taxation, which in turn increases the transition risk. So the risk that you own companies which, for whatever reason, are unable to operate or unable to grow in the way which is expected. You can mitigate this in two ways. One, reallocating capital to asset classes or individual companies that have lower climate risk. Been spending a lot of time considering what the opportunities are there. And second, and equally importantly, possibly more importantly, is through active stewardship of the assets. Engaging with underlying companies, make sure that they have appropriate plans to decarbonise, continue to operate in the world. That's a top priority both for the fund level, also for your underlying investment managers. In summary, then, the 2020s are shaping up to be a much more challenging time to invest than most of the 2010s were. We think the fund is pretty well positioned with its well diversified portfolio and a good, capable lineup of investment managers. But nonetheless, there's going to be some really tough challenges to face. Having said that, and to try and cheer everybody up, we would encourage you to remain alert to the opportunities. What you can pretty well guarantee, however bad things get in the investment market, however great the challenges, there will always be interesting opportunities. And as a long-term investor, you are relatively well placed through your investment managers to take advantage of opportunities, and you should. That's all I was going to say. I'll stop. If I've got any time, probably not.
Can I catch the questions?
Yeah. Any questions? It'll be the first time. No worries. I'll be hanging around afterwards, so do catch me if there is anything else that you want to go into. Thank you very much.
Really helpful.
Morning, everyone. My name is Milo Kerr. I am the Head of Client Relationship Management at Warwickshire Coast. So Philip has spent some time talking about how to set your investment strategy. I'm going to spend a bit of time about how that is implemented, which is a key area that Warwickshire Coast partner with Warwickshire on. So what I'm going to cover first of all is our purpose. Why does Warwickshire Coast exist? Why do we partner with Warwickshire Pension Fund? What our progress has been since we launched in 2018. A quick overview of your investments that you have with Warwickshire Coast and the performance that they have witnessed in recent years. And then fourthly, how on your behalf we are ensuring that we are a responsible investor and really focusing on areas such as climate change, environment, social and governance risks. I'll probably be talking for about 10 minutes, but we'll have a bit of time for questions at the end, only quite a short presentation. So first of all, looking at purpose and approach, why are we here? Well, in July 2015, central government looked to the 80 plus administering authorities across England and Wales, each of which were implementing their own investments in different ways, and agreed that efficiencies could be achieved in this area. They looked to pull together a number of these administering authorities across the countries with four key objectives. First of all, to get better benefits of scale. Secondly, improve the governance and the decision making across the implementation of their investments. Thirdly, reducing costs, improving that value for money that each of the administering authorities are getting with their investments. And fourthly, the goal of really improving capacity and the capability to invest and access infrastructure investments that a lot of authorities were doing, but not all of them. They looked for 6, that was their target, across England and Wales. They've ended up with 8, so close enough, which you can see on this page, in general, are aligned regionally. Now, Warwickshire Coast, whilst has a tilt towards the northeast of England, came together really out of the view of a shared set of principles, a shared set of beliefs that various councils and authorities across the country felt that they had in common. So we view ourselves very much as a pool that came together out of beliefs as opposed to necessarily geography. So Warwickshire Coast, when it was launched, had 12 administering authorities. Two of those merged since we've launched. We now have 11. The pool itself represents partner funds. The administering authorities we refer to as partner funds. They, in aggregate, have about 60 billion of power. Now, we don't manage all of that. Councillor Kettle mentioned earlier. Warwickshire Coast manages around 38 billion, so about 2/3 of that. But in terms of the assets that we represent, that is the largest pool across England and Wales. So we worked with our various partner funds throughout the years, really to create an organisation that at the heart of it, our vision is to make a difference to the LGPS. So across each of the functions of our business, investment, corporate and people, that is our sole purpose and what we come to work for. So collectively, working with Warwickshire and the other 10 partner funds, we're looking really to give a stronger voice to each of the partner funds that we invest on behalf of, working in partnership to really deliver cost-effective, innovative, but also responsible and sustainable investment solutions. Now, Border to Coast is unique in the sense of not only do we have the 11 partner funds that are investors, but they are also our owners. So Warwickshire owns 1/11 Border to Coast, along with the other 10 partner funds. So really, if we turn on to the next slide, that puts the customer at the heart of the organisation. It has to be involved in everything that we do, from the launch and design of solutions right through to how we're monitoring your investments and working with Warwickshire Pension Fund on an ongoing basis. And that also combines with our other values that are posted all over our office if you're ever in Leeds, around collaboration, integrity, and sustainability. Really core as to what we're trying to achieve. So how have we done? So like I say, launched in 2018, our first reported accounts were 31st of March 2019. If we look at the highlights from our 31st of March accounts this year, as I mentioned, we have 38 billion of assets under management. We represent those 11 partner funds, just to be 12 now 11. Since launching, we have passed on 14 million of savings partner funds, and that's expected to grow and continue to grow recently in the coming years. We have 13 different investment propositions that our partner funds can access, growing to a size of around 140 colleagues across those functions that I mentioned before, the investment side, corporate side, and the people side. And also collectively, we have a much stronger voice as investors now being part of this 38 billion, as opposed to as a partner fund on your own. And collectively, that's not something that we take for granted. So we engage with over 1,600 companies since launch on a wide range of issues. We voted on your behalf on over 12,000 shareholder resolutions. That collective voice is really an aim of us as an organisation. Now, it doesn't stop there. It has been certainly a very busy 4 or 5 years, but we really need to make sure that we have the building blocks that allows Warwickshire Pension Fund and the other partner funds to implement the investment strategy that Philip was talking around, not just for today, but into the future. So on the right hand, on your right hand side there, a list of the kind of solutions that we will continue to look to launch. Key proposition coming next year and the year after will be around real estate and property. That's currently a building block that's missing from our menu, but one that we're working with partner funds on to establish. And that degree of learning about the partner funds' objectives, what they require, will continue in the years to come. So what does Warwickshire Pension Fund's investments look like with Border to Coast? First of all, I'll say on the next slide, a lot of the funds that you access through Border to Coast are actually what we would call funded funds. So we aren't necessarily picking the stocks, we are picking the investment managers that will go out there and identify the companies. But we don't just look at the portfolios through that lens. We look at it through across different types of strategy, different types of fees, responsible investment, sustainable investment, but also right down to the granular level of what stocks those companies are purchasing on your behalf. So it starts at the funds, but we're monitoring across a wide range of different lenses. Now, as Councillor Kettle mentioned before, around 43% of your assets currently fall with Border to Coast. The majority of that is across equities, a combination of UK and global, managed on an active basis. So we're not just buying the market, we're trying to outperform and add value versus the market. Corporate bonds, so effectively lending to different companies, and multi-asset credit, another form of lending as well, a new allocation that John was made this year. The total around 1 billion across those. And you've also established a programme of investing in private markets, which these are much more longer term assets that you're locked into, where you will effectively have a stake in a company, or in the example of private equity. Over time, we look to add value to that company and potentially thing goes on to list and you get your money and a much larger return back. But in general, committed around 400 million to the Audit Coast's alternatives programme. It takes time to deploy that and put that into the market. We've currently invested about 100 million of that on your behalf, but we've identified opportunities for over half of that 400 to work in the coming. We turn to performance. Here I'm showing the performance of the three main funds. I'm not showing multi-asset credit because it hasn't been in place for a year yet. But over the calendar years since launch, I would say that in 2021, the funds had a very strong year, both in terms of absolute performance, but also versus the wider market. So we saw a very strong bounce back from the lows of COVID in 2020, with your equity funds delivering over 30% return in a single year. The Audit Coast added value versus the rest of the market. So some of the positions that we take, we're able to add value versus what the wider market has achieved. 2022 has been a much more challenging year, both in terms of the overall market, but also the level of outperformance that Audit Coast has delivered. So we have facing a number of headwinds in the markets, and it's touched on some that are looking forwards, but higher interest rates, higher inflation, but also risks that really we can foresee. The invasion of Ukraine being a very key one. We came into the year with a position where we were quite positive and upbeat on Europe as a region. We felt slightly negative towards energy, and actually the invasion of Ukraine proved that both of us actually underperformed versus the wider market. We have very strong conviction in the managers that underlie these portfolios, so we think that they're well placed and well positioned to benefit from market conditions from year one, challenging them maybe. Coming on to responsible investment, sustainability really has been at the forefront of why we launch solutions and how we design solutions. So one of the key areas is around engagement with companies. Like I said, we have a much stronger voice by partnering with the 10 other partner funds across the country, collectively representing 40 billion. But we also look for opportunities to collaborate with other nationwide initiatives or global initiatives, where we're pooling with other investment managers, other investors, give an even bigger collective voice. And we focus those engagement efforts across the board, but we spend a lot of time looking at the top carbon emitters, for example, within our portfolio. Pressure to try and reduce their carbon. Now, a big milestone in our steps towards continuing as a responsible investor is our plan to net zero. So in last month, we announced the details in our strategy to achieving a net zero position by 2050, with milestone steps along the way, as shown on this slide. So in 2030. We're aiming for 100% of our portfolio companies to be engaged with 100% of the companies within the portfolios, with 70% of those companies achieving net zero by 2050. Increasing that alignment again to 100% by 2040, such that by 2050, companies that you invest in aggregate will be net zero carbon. We will review each of these milestones along the way, and this area and the way that it's measured and the data quality really is evolving very rapidly. But there's a strong team and a resilient team behind implementing this process. The plan itself has been established in collaboration with the partner funds. It's also been very widely received by the industry. We've been nominated for the best approach to responsible investment at the Awards in December, in recognition of the climate change strategy. There's a bit more detail on some of the investments that can be shared afterwards, but I'm happy to take any questions, but I'll just leave you some closing remarks that we are extremely proud to partner with Warwickshire Pension Fund, and certainly express our thanks to their commitment about this partnership and the position that we've got to today.
Sorry, Andy Felton, Assistant Director of Finance at Warwickshire County Council. The pension fund sits under me. Just a couple of things to mention. Warwickshire Pension Fund is one of the smaller pension funds within Warwickshire Coast, but actually don't feel that way. We get an equal voice as a shareholder, so we do get the ability to influence alongside everybody else and develop things in the same way. We've got very active officers within the council that work with Warwickshire Coast and the other partners within Warwickshire Coast as well. And the other thing to say is that whilst you already mentioned a 40% that was with Warwickshire Coast at the moment, partly down to the fact that we've got quite a strong strategy around passive investment, which is where you just invest in an index. Warwickshire Coast have helped us also, and other partners, sort of put that arrangement in place as well. So whilst they're not directly managing that, they have it at hand in seeing that as part of the pool. So actually the percentage is probably a lot higher than the 40% of the direct benefits.
Any other questions? That's it. I'll be around afterwards for lunch as well. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Over the afternoon. Pleased to know there's only 2 more presentations left. So it's been a long morning, and I feel like we've probably gone a bit full circle now because you've come back to me. I'm Vicky James, the Pensions Administration Delivery Lead. So if you deal with the day-to-day management of sending information to the Pensions Administration team, it will be my team that you deal with, predominantly Alistair Wickens, who's sat quietly in the corner. He's our employee relations team leader, so it'll be his team that will be dealing with your queries on a day-to-day basis. So, as I said, going back full circle, what Chris alluded to at the beginning was what is our purpose. So the main purpose is that we pay accurate pensions to our members and give them enough information that they've got an informed choice to understand what their pension is and what it will provide. And to be able to do that, we obviously have to support you as our employers to be able to give us that data that we need to calculate benefits. And, you know, what I would like to focus on is that we get that information in its right first time. It's really important that we kind of work with you and support you so you understand what your responsibility is, that we get that information from you, and then that means that your employees get the pension that they've built up. And all of that leads to a first class service. So we've got, you know, a big range of stakeholders. So we've got your employees as our members, and that ranges from, you know, cooks in the kitchen to the chief executives at the top. So there's a massive range of members in that sense, but also as employers, we've got lots of different types of employers as well. So we're always happy to take kind of feedback on how we engage with you. If it's not hitting you at the right level, then please talk to us about it, and we can arrange to do something different. So to be able to deliver that service administration service, again, through all the other presentations, you will have seen about the challenge that we face. You know, and this isn't just specific to pensions either, resourcing. COVID gave us that opportunity to work from home, and we've embraced that. Our team are really happy to be able to have that flexibility to do some work at home, or now be able to come back into the office. But nationally, funds are struggling to recruit, and I think that's across the public sector in general. So there is an issue about recruitment. We're also finding that staff are more transient, whereas when I started in pensions 25 years ago, you know, you were in that for life. You literally started at age 20, you retired at age 60. That was your job. Now we're seeing people coming and going in jobs, and that has a knock-on effect, not only just for resourcing, but also on our workload. We do spend more time training, obviously, because people at home, you haven't got that atmosphere within an office where you can open a conversation and pick up certain things. So you do have to be a bit more planned around training. And again, you said, you know, there's pros and cons of working from home. It's ideal, it's much more flexible for some people, but for others, it's better to be in that office environment. And we also had that conversation earlier about academies. Our number of employers is growing. So again, when I started in pension administration, we had maybe a handful of employers. It was your big councils, your districts, your parish and town councils. Now our biggest growth is academies. We've still got yet 100 schools to convert to academy, and with each one of those there's the potential of additional contractors coming in that are delivering services for catering and cleaning. There's also complexity. I think you all will know from what we talk about with what we're dealing with, the complexity of administering the pension scheme provides challenge. So, you know, a lot of the work that we do is deemed as financial, but you also need to understand rules and regulations and be able to apply that to the work that we do. So there's also different things that are coming along. So McLeod, the age discrimination remedy, the additional workload that puts on us, guaranteed minimum pension reconciliation, which thankfully we've done, but that did also create resource issue for having to get that work sorted out. And then there's also linked to different types of schemes that we're administering, different retirement ages. So as a team, as an administration team, we have to understand that. We also have to, you know, explain it to the members and hopefully see that they understand what their pension is made up of and how we get to the figures. Technology, it's really important that we've got technology that supports us in what we do because it is so complex. If we have to do everything that we did manually, we just wouldn't get anything done basically. So the technology, we need to make sure that it's keeping up to date with the kind of legislation changes that we're facing, and also that it helps us to deliver that kind of high volume work, which is kind of not less value, but takes time for the team to deliver, that we can get systems to do that for us, and then we can focus on the more complex aspects of the job. With that though, obviously we've got the worry of cyber and online fraud, you know, cyber security, all that. We need to make sure we're up to date with protecting ourselves against that. And as I said, just making sure that software can keep up to date with all the changes that are going on for us. The local government pension scheme, over the years, governance, we've got multi-layers of governance, we've got so much oversight on us, and not all of it wants the same thing at the same time. So, you know, we're very kind of scrutinised and making sure that we're doing a proper job and doing it in the right way and being transparent in the way that we do it. But that, on top of the day-to-day stuff, is an extra additional burden. So Victoria's team leads with the governance side of things, but that has oversight over the administration, the investments, and what the actual whole team, the fund team do. So those are the challenges. Not all bad news. We have had some good things going on as well. So some successes, and you've heard iConnect mentioned several times, and I hope as employers you understand how this makes our job a lot easier, and hopefully your job's easier as well. iConnect means that you transfer your data electronically. It goes into the administration systems, posts directly to member records, no manual intervention, and that means we've got 17,000 active members. Each member has something like 6 items of data posted per month. That's thousands and thousands of items of data that's posted. So that's worked really well. That's helped to reduce our breaches. So for you to get your information to us on time, that's really cut down on the numbers that weren't getting to us on time. And that's really good for us as a fund, because it means we're working with you as our employers, you're delivering what we need, and that means people are getting the benefits that they're due. So MSS, Member Self-Service, we've just launched that this year. So this is the online portal for members. They can go in, they can view their pension details, they can run estimates for themselves, they can update personal details on there as well. So that's took a little bit of administration burden away from us, but we're allowing members to do things for themselves. But also, we're hoping that that kind of is informing them a bit more about pensions, so that the more that they can look at things, they can kind of understand, this is how my pension is made up, and this is what I can do to improve it, or this is what I'm going to get on retirement. Is that going to be enough for me to kind of live on? When can I plan for retirement? And increasing data quality scores. So this is really important. Full circle again. The valuation is important. Data has to be good. for us to give you kind of high confidence in your employer contribution rates that are being calculated. So, you know, working with iConnect, getting your data transferred across and getting those high scores on data quality is, you know, key to everything being right. So we keep working on you with that. If, you know, we're identifying the data, we'll talk to you, we'll establish what needs to be done, and then we can get that fixed through the next kind of round of information that comes through from you. So what's next? Cloud seems to have been ongoing for ages. It's there as what's next because there's been a delay in the response to the consultation from the government. That's expected at the end of November, probably around Christmas Eve. They might be giving us a Christmas present like that. But we should then get draft regulations so that the legislation that's needed to deliver age discrimination remedy will be in place for the 1st of October 2023. So we've done the first part of the exercise. We have collected data off all of our employers, everything that we needed. We've spoken to you about it and you've delivered it. So we've got the information that we need. The next steps will be to look at our members who have got service in the remedy period, which is 2014 to 2022, identify if any of them need a benefit recalculation, and deliver that information to the members. Now, this is a massive exercise and there's probably going to be a very small number of people that are affected because what it's looking at if a member's final salary benefits would have been higher than the care benefit that they're getting for that period. And 9 times out of 10, the care benefit will be the better benefit. But there are certain people where actually final salary would be higher. So we've got to do all of those checks against all of those people. So that will be happening. So for employers, there's probably no more work for you to take part in at the minute, but once we start looking at member benefits, there may be some messages that we just need your help to communicate to members so that we can kind of say, this is going on, we'll contact you if you're affected. You know, please don't come to us with lots of queries because a lot of the membership aren't going to see any difference on the benefits for this. Dashboards. I don't know if anybody's heard about the pensions dashboards. So this is Department of Works and Pensions, the government are creating pensions dashboards where you can log into a dashboard and you'll see all of your pension pots in one place and they will tell you the value of those pensions. So we need to prepare ourselves so that members will go into that dashboard, they'll put in their information and it will fly across to every pension scheme in the land and hit one where they've got a pension and then send data back to that person so that they can have a bit of pensions. The purpose of it is to reunite people who've lost pensions, which is a really good thing because we struggle with goneways. You know, people, they have a small pension held with us, they move around, they forget about it, then we have to try and trace them. So hopefully that will help us with that work. But there's some preparation work that we need to do to be able to be ready for dashboard, and data quality is key to that. So that is part of our business as usual. That's what we're always doing, but we just need to keep on top of that. Also coming down the track is change to normal pension age. So this is for people that have service in the local government pension scheme. Currently, you can access benefits from age 55 onwards, but that's been linked to state pension age from 2027. That will move to 57 unless you've got a protection. So there's going to be a massive communication exercise needed there to share that message to members because we've got different categories of members that have got different protections. So again, this is another requirement that's going to be coming in. So that's a kind of a big communication exercise that we'll have to do. There's also guaranteed minimum pension equalisation coming in, which I won't bore you on, but it's another job that we will have to look at. So you know, there's all these kind of extra things that we're having to deal with alongside of what we class as business as usual. So if you've got any questions about any of the topics today, you can get in touch with the Pension Fund. We've got a direct email address. There's lots of information held on our website as well, and we're doing quite a bit of work updating the content on there as well, and trying to make it as user friendly as possible. We've got the investments email address as well, which is Victoria's team, and we've also got the login for mental health service portal. So if you are in the local pension scheme in Warwickshire, you can log on there and have a look at your pension benefits. So that's all from me. The only other thing that I was going to add is that Rob and Richard were talking to you about your certificates, your rates and adjustment certificates that are going to come through. They're going to confirm your primary and secondary rates and kind of give you just a bit more information about your own particular funding levels and how those have been arrived at. So there will be a covering letter that comes out with that. There will be your certificate. There will be the funding strategy statement as well for you to review and provide comments on. And there will be some further information, some help. There's a video that you can watch that will explain how the certificate, how the figures have been arrived at. So, but if you do have any other questions, contact details on the slides as well. So hopefully that will all become clear. So that's it for me. I will now pass over to Victoria. Oh, one thing that I have forgotten is obviously just to say a big thank you to the team for all of the work that they've done over the year. Again, we talk about we're doing business as usual, but we're doing a lot more on top of that as well. So they've implemented, you know, mental health service iConnect over the last few years, which has took a lot of resource. So it's just a big thank you to the team for all the work that they've done. And to Victoria.
Thanks, Vicky. So hi, my name's Victoria Moffat. I'm the lead pensions and investments manager here at Warwickshire Pension Fund. My background is as a trained actuary and as an investment consultant, but there are certain parts of the LGPS that are definitely very interesting in you, and hopefully today everyone's picked up different parts about how the LGPS is run. I'd like to also thank the team for their hard work over the past year. It's been really nice actually moving back into a hybrid setting, so getting to see people face to face, and hopefully in your own organisations you've experienced maybe similar kind of situations. So over the next few minutes, I was going to talk through the key responsibilities that were slightly outlined by Chris Norton in his opening presentation. So the pension fund is led in its governance, investment and funding decision making by councillors on the Pension Fund Investment Subcommittee. And it's supported by a raft of consultants, advisors and officers, and there's oversight from the local pension board and staff and pensions committee. The Pension Fund Investment Subcommittee is responsible for things such as the valuation, the strategy and the implementation of the strategy. So we've already heard a little bit from our scheme actuary, Hymans Robertson, our investment consultants, Hymans Robertson, and our active implementation partner, Border to Coast. Today, I'm going to focus more on the governance aspects. So in terms of governance, the risk register is one of our main tools for ensuring that we quantify the likelihood and impact of core risks faced by the fund. These are measured both in terms of their inherent risks and also the residual risk once mitigating factors have been taken into account. We place these scores on a map to provide a visual reference of where the fund is exposed to identified risks. And each quarter, officers reconsider the risks that the fund is exposed to, and as new ones arise, add those to the register as appropriate. We also consider what additional actions can be taken to try to reduce unwanted risks further and behave in line with the risk budgets that you can see set out in the table shown. You might have noticed that the fund has consciously decided to be open to risk when it comes to non-matching financial assets. This is because these are the growth assets which Philip and Rob and Richard mentioned earlier that help to drive long-term returns. And these help to set contribution rates that take into consideration these higher expected long-term returns and are therefore lower contribution rates than if the fund were not open to this type of risk. That said, the fund is very careful about how this risk budget is implemented. The fund recognises the importance of well-structured governance arrangements and brought in a new role several years ago to provide specific leadership in this area, and that's the Governance and Policy Technical Specialist, which is held by Martin Griffiths, so thank you to him for his hard work here. This role monitors our schedule of policies, and as you can see from the list, there are plenty to monitor and review and update. The updates happen in a very collaborative way. As Vicky mentioned, our teams do work very closely together, and we bring in additional expertise where relevant, whether this is accessing Warwickshire County Council's legal team or asking the fund scheme actuary to provide a draft, or asking for the fund's investment consultant to set out best practices that have maybe been seen elsewhere. Considerable time has been spent over the past year ensuring that our business continuity plan and cyber risk plan provide guidance in case trouble does strike. The training plan has gone from strength to strength, and with an established cycle of 2 workshops per quarter now in place, I'm very grateful to all of those who attend these and participate in making sure that there is good knowledge across the range of individuals involved. And we use something called a knowledge assessment annually to see where more support can be provided and to check that across participants, the aggregate knowledge is really strong. And we're looking forward to seeing the results of that this season. The 2021 external audit concluded with an unqualified audit opinion, and the 2021 accounts were signed off in December 21. This year's accounts are likely to follow the same kind of sign-off path as the draft version is undergoing its final review. So many thanks to the funds team for ensuring that these important items are seen through. Alongside these policies, there are also contracts which we review, and we do that on a rotation to ensure that our agreements are up to date and are meeting the fund's needs. Each quarter, the investment subcommittee receives an indication of the funding level, and every 6 months there is a more up-to-date, in-depth funding update paper which sets out how the past service liabilities are developing. The investment outlook is also outlined, and the required rate of return to have sufficient assets to meet earned benefit payments. So there really is a lot of scrutiny of how the fund is progressing at a regular stage rather than just at the triennial valuations. Assumption setting took place in last December's investment subcommittee, with an interactive workshop held a week before to ensure that the investment subcommittee were able to fully debate and understand in advance of making decisions. We've already heard about the valuation and the process that the scheme actuaries undertook, and I'd like to take a moment to thank them and their teams for all their hard work, so thank you. If you would like to speak to them about your individual employer valuation results, please do approach them. This is a really good opportunity to meet with your fund actuary and ask them questions. Though obviously, as Vicky mentioned and Chris has mentioned, please do feel free to contact the teams directly at the fund too. One additional point of interest is that this triennial cycle, the fund commissioned work on the expected impact of climate change on the pension fund. This modelled 3 different scenarios and assessed possible impacts on inflation and global equity returns, which feed into the expected funding level. So we really are taking this seriously. This theme of assessing climate change risk is something that is an evolving part of the investment subcommittee's work on strategy. The fund needs to ultimately focus on ensuring that the rates of return required by the valuation are achieved, and that there is enough income generated to cover any shortfall between contributions, benefits, and expenses. To support this aim, investment targets have been set, and 2 key aspects of this are ensuring the allocation of the right amounts to the right investments, so the strategic asset allocation, and then within each investment fund, having a target risk return profile that is delivered across the appropriate time frame, usually 3 to 5 years. So when Milo was showing the border to coast results earlier, it's not yet over a medium-term time frame, so it's a little bit too soon to really have an opinion on how those funds are performing. The asset allocation and revisions to it since the last valuation were covered by Philip, and these are sense checked by the fund's independent advisors, Dr. Bob Swarup and Anthony Fletcher. The ISC has received 6 monthly macroeconomics reports, which are a new addition to the agenda and seem to be proving very useful in ensuring that the committee has a chance to understand the context in which the pension fund operates. These papers highlight the greatest influences on the fund, and key areas brought forward have included the impact of government policies and geopolitics, inflation, including supply chain issues and expectations around future movements, real interest rates in the UK and the fragility of the UK economy, the pace of capital deployment in private markets mandates. And in each of these instances, we've asked, so what? How does this affect the pension fund in our ability to pay members' benefits in full, on time, while setting affordable and stable contribution rates for employers? and generating sustainable investment returns over the long term. So, to support the fund in making sound decisions about the impact of the portfolio on climate risk, the investment subcommittee received a carbon footprint paper in the June 2022 meeting. This is a public document, so if you're interested, please do feel free to have a look at it. This looked at the weighted average carbon intensity, absolute carbon emissions, the percentage of the portfolio in green revenues, and also the percentage of the portfolio with ties to fossil fuels. Based on this report, the fund is going to engage more with its investment managers and ensure that time is given both to understanding the influence exerted on companies and how this benefits carbon reduction, as well as improving the data quality available to the investment industry. At the moment, it's a little bit haphazard. This is going to become increasingly necessary over the next few years as the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures is likely to come into force for the LGPS in the next year or two. Oh, skipped one already. Earlier, Philip set out the higher level investment strategy that was updated over the past year. And as he mentioned, it's been more tweaks rather than fundamental changes. This slide sets out how the strategy is implemented. As you can see, we use an ecosystem of investment managers. The fund does, however, have two main managers. These are Border to Coast Pensions Partnership and Legal and General Investment Management, LGIM, where Border to Coast provides responsible investment oversight. So we do actually tap into the Border to Coast knowledge and expertise to make sure that that manager is also held accountable in terms of its stewardship. The other managers used as specialists in private markets. We heard from Milo earlier about how Border to Coast not only implements the active portion of Warwickshire's investment strategy, but also develops new funds to meet our and our other partner funds' needs. This is an area of considerable engagement, with the fund attending joint committee meetings, S151 calls, bi-monthly officer group meetings, and ad hoc workshops on fund design, quarterly fund updates, and working together on other pooling related matters, harnessing the expertise and resources available through the pooling system. As a shareholder, as well as an investor, this relationship is very close, and our intentions are well aligned to make pooling a success, so we can keep making Warwickshire Pension Fund a success. On that, does anyone have any questions? No? In that case, I'll pass over to Chris Lawton. Thank you.
Thank you all for attending. And the last factor today is to answer for Vicky, Martin, Sean, and other colleagues who made this event happen. We've had 2 years of doing it differently. Just to get back into it. So thanks very much to you all. We've got some food on. I propose that we don't take open questions now, because for anyone who's pushed for time and needs to go, don't want to hold you up. For anyone who does have questions, a lot of us have been here. That's something that we'd be happy to talk about anything that you. So thank you very much.